Hey there, night owl. Or should I say, night eagle. Before we drift into this cozy historical tale, take a gentle moment to tap that thumbs up, subscribe if you're enjoying the midnight musings, and turn on post notifications. That way, you'll never miss another whisper from history while you're winding down. Now, have you set the vibe? Lights low, blinds drawn, maybe a warm beverage nearby and your blanket wrapped snug like a hug from Lady Liberty herself. And if you've got a dog or a cat, this is their cue to curl up and become your snuggle buddy for the evening. Now, let's address something important. You're wrapped like a Chipotle burrito, lights dimmed, already halfway to REM, and here comes your roommate's boyfriend, Chad, thinking he's about to get revolutionary in the sheets. Nah. Tell him to hold this L. Netflix and chill has been benched like it forgot the national anthem. We're saluting naps tonight. Oh, and before you fully melt into your pillows, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. I'd love to hear your sleepy corner of the world. And if you or anyone in your family has ever served to protect freedom, we're sending you a slow, heartfelt salute. This one's for you. So what's the deal with July 4th anyway? Well, Independence Day is the birthday party of all birthday parties in America. But instead of balloons and a Costco sheet cake, we've got fireworks, barbecues, and Uncle Sam wearing those pants again. Celebrated every year on July 4th, it marks the moment in 1776 when the 13 colonies officially gave Britain the old breakup letter, sealed, signed, and served with revolutionary sass. But how did it all begin? What led up to that fateful July day? What made everyday farmers turn into freedom fighters? Who whispered the words that ignited the flames of liberty? And what did folks back home do while their loved ones were off battling in red, white, and muddy boots? Tonight, we'll unravel the full tapestry, thread by thread, of America's journey to independence. From tea tantrums in Boston, to candlelit debates in Philadelphia, to letters home from the front lines, we'll trace every spark and every starlit step along the road to freedom. There'll be chuckles, there'll be chills, and if I do my job right, maybe a little snoring too. So, let's tuck into Chapter 1. But hey, if you fall asleep halfway through, don't worry. Even George Washington took naps, probably under a cherry tree. Chapter 1. Tea, Taxes, and Tantrums. The Pre-Party Problems. Before there were fireworks, flags, and founding fathers in powdered wigs declaring things, there were awkward vibes. Like, colonist wearing wool in the summer kind of awkward. And it all started with the thing Gen Z knows best. Unnecessary charges. Picture it. It's the early 1700s. The 13 colonies are just vibing on the East Coast. Farming, trading, chilling by candlelight, and still figuring out how to spell Massachusetts without autocorrect. They're technically British subjects, under the rule of King George III, which sounds regal until you realize he's basically the HOA of colonial life. At first, things were civil. Britain provided protection, and the colonies gave back resources like tobacco, sugar, and salty opinions. But after the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, the British Empire had one big problem. They were broke. Like, skip your iced latte and cancel Netflix kind of broke. So naturally, King George did what any financially stressed empire would do. He tried to get someone else to pay the bill. And guess who was closest? America. Enter the petty taxarch. Here came the Stamp Act of 1765, the Sugar Act, the Townshend Acts, and basically anything the British Parliament could name after household items. Colonists were now being taxed on everything from newspapers to playing cards. Not Uno, but still rude. And the colonists were like, we didn't even get to vote on this. No taxation without representation. Remember that? Yeah, that wasn't just a slogan. It was the ultimate 1700s clapback. So naturally, protests started brewing. And yes, that's a tea pun. You're welcome. Colonists organized boycotts, wrote spicy pamphlets, and gathered in taverns to sip hard cider and say things like, "This is giving dictatorship." Boston Tea Party, the most dramatic sip in history. Fast forward to 1773. The British passed the Tea Act, which basically gave the East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. Colonists could only buy British tea, even though it was taxed. It was like being forced to order room-temperature gas station coffee, and still paying a premium. So, one night, a group of rebellious colonists dressed up as Mohawk warriors, a choice we do not endorse now, snuck aboard British ships and yeeted 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. Estimated value in today's money? Over $1 million. That's not just a beverage dump, that's a statement. It was less of a protest and more of a colonial mic drop. Imagine tossing your Starbucks into the ocean because you're over corporate policies. That's the energy. When word got back to London, the British government clutched their pearls. They called it the Boston Tea Party. The colonies called it Tuesday. In retaliation, the British passed the Coercive Acts, also known by colonists as the Intolerable Acts, because when you call something intolerable, you're not just mad, you're theatrically mad. They closed Boston Harbor, basically the Wi-Fi of colonial trade, enforced stricter British control and said, "No more town meetings, Karen." That's when even the moderates in the colonies started side-eyeing the crown. Fun fact: Paul Revere was already gossiping long before the Midnight Ride. Paul Revere was stirring the pot as a silversmith and member of the Sons of Liberty, a low-key rebel group with high-key printing skills. They ran the colonial group chat. They printed memes. They posted the receipts. And they made sure everyone knew King George was giving villain energy. The vibe shifts. By the time we reach 1774, colonists were no longer just annoyed. They were organizing. They were writing letters. They were literally forming Congress. The First Continental Congress met in Philadelphia and basically said, "Hey Britain, we'd like a word." They didn't declare independence just yet, but they did agree to boycott British goods and start preparing militias. Because nothing says "we want peace" like a casual militia. Spoiler alert, peace was not on the menu. Chapter 2. Midnight Rides and Messy Breakups. By 1775, the colonies had reached the historical equivalent of "we need to talk." They'd written letters, thrown tea, held meetings, and sent strongly worded scrolls. And what did King George III say in return? Basically, "Try me." Which they did. Shots fired. Literally. It all went down on April 19th, 1775, in the towns of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce of colonial hotspots. British troops were sent to seize colonial weapons and arrest rebel leaders. But the colonists were like, "Nah, we're keeping our muskets, thanks." Early that morning, somewhere between the mist and muskets, a single shot rang out. No one knows who fired it. Could have been a soldier, could have been a squirrel, could have been a deeply chaotic goose. But that mysterious bullet would go down in history as the shot heard round the world. In short, the American Revolution officially said, "It's on." Paul Revere's midnight moment. Let's rewind just a bit. The night before all that drama, a man named Paul Revere mounted a horse and galloped through the countryside yelling, "The British are coming!" Although historians say he may have actually said, "The regulars are coming," which is far less cinematic. Either way, the man was on his colonial DoorDash hustle, spreading the word faster than a group chat in crisis. Fun fact, he didn't ride alone. William Dawes and Samuel Prescott also joined the revolutionary relay race, but Paul got all the credit because his name rhymed better in poems. Honestly, classic PR move. British redcoats versus colonial realness. When the British showed up in Lexington, they found a small group of colonial militiamen, the kind who probably still had farm chores to do after the battle. Someone fired. Chaos erupted. 8 colonists died. The British moved on to Concord, where they found way more resistance than expected. Colonists were now shooting from behind fences, trees, and stone walls. It was giving revolution but make it guerrilla warfare. The British retreated back to Boston, taking heavy losses. The colonists were shook, but also kind of like, yo, we really did that. Fun fact. George Washington gets the group chat invite back in Philly, the Second Continental Congress convened. They realized, okay, this is no longer a vibes issue. It's a full-on war. So they decided to build a continental army, which is like starting an elite fight club, but with less shirtlessness and more powdered wigs. Their pick to lead the troops? George Washington. Virginia-born, tall, slightly dramatic, owned land, had teeth, some of them. The man had resume energy. Washington rode to Boston to take command and instantly started training the troops like it was revolutionary boot camp. Think less Bridgerton tea time, more colonial CrossFit. Meanwhile, the colonies were spiraling. This wasn't just about musket battles and cool uniforms. Regular folks across the colonies were living in a constant state of, wait, are we actually going to war with Britain? Letters from the front lines were emotional. Families rationed food. Towns argued about loyalty. Some colonists still wanted to make up with the crown. They were called loyalists. Others were fully block his number, throw his stuff in the harbor mode, aka the Patriots. It was messy, like shared Spotify account after a breakup messy. Enter Thomas Jefferson, quill in hand. By 1776, things were escalating like a group project gone wrong. The Continental Congress said, okay, let's do this. We're writing the breakup letter. And they handed the task to Thomas Jefferson, who was basically the quiet guy in the group chat who always types in lowercase but delivers fire when it counts. In a rented room in Philadelphia, surrounded by candlelight, anxiety, and probably a slice of colonial pie, Jefferson began crafting the Declaration of Independence. He wrote, rewrote, edited, got peer-reviewed by John Adams and Ben Franklin, and then delivered the literary equivalent of, "We're done, we're blocking you, and also here's a list of everything you did wrong." By mid-1776, word was spreading. Towns were reading drafts of the Declaration aloud. People were gathering in public squares, some cheering, others nervous. The idea of full independence was thrilling, but also terrifying. If this failed, they weren't just losing a war, they were committing treason. Like, hang you in the town square kind of treason. Still, the energy was electric. The colonies were over it. They didn't want to be grounded by the crown anymore. They wanted to wear crop tops and make their own rules. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Chapter 3. Signed, sealed, declared. The breakup letter heard round the world. It's the summer of 1776, and Philly is giving humid, dramatic, and historically iconic. You've got powdered wigs flopping in the heat, quills scratching on parchment, and the air thick with the scent of revolution, and probably old-timey B.O. Inside the Pennsylvania State House, now famously known as Independence Hall, the Second Continental Congress was in full, it's complicated mode with Britain. They'd fought battles, thrown tea, flexed with militias. But this was the big step. The official, "It's not us, it's you" letter. Thomas Jefferson, the original soft boy. We left off with Thomas Jefferson staring moodily at parchment in a rented Philly apartment, cue lo-fi beats to draft a revolution to. He was 33 years old, a bit shy, bookish, and honestly giving "I annotate my paperbacks" energy. But his pen? Savage. His draft of the Declaration of Independence wasn't just a polite, "We're leaving." It was bold, spicy, and filled with receipts. He started with a mic drop line. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," which, let's be honest, was aspirational at the time, but it set the vibe. Then came the list of grievances, basically the colonial version of a Notes app apology in reverse. The group chat. Approves, eventually. Jefferson handed over the draft to his little feedback circle, John Adams and Benjamin Franklin. Adams was the type A overachiever. Franklin was the older guy in the group who somehow always had stories, snacks, and at least 2 side hustles. They tweaked it, argued over commas, and then presented it to Congress. Cue the week of debates, because of course, 13 colonies meant 13 opinions, 13 egos, and 13 different colonial accents. After some editing, and removing a line criticizing slavery which, yikes, more on that in later chapters, the final version was voted on, July 2nd. Wait, what? Here's the twist. Congress actually voted for independence on July 2nd, 1776. That's right. July 2nd was the day they said, "We're out." John Adams even wrote to his wife Abigail, saying that July 2nd would be celebrated with fireworks for generations. Awkward, because 2 days later, on July 4th, they approved the final wording of the Declaration of Independence, the version we all know and meme today. So July 4th became the birthday of the USA, and July 2nd? That's the forgotten middle child of freedom. Contrary to what school posters show, not everyone signed the Declaration on July 4th. In fact, only John Hancock and a few others signed it that day. Hancock signed first and signed huge, like full-page signature in a yearbook huge. Why? Legend says he wanted King George to read it without his glasses. That's the 1776 equivalent of an all-caps text. The rest of the signers trickled in over the next few weeks. In total, 56 men signed the document, knowing full well that if this didn't work out, they'd be hanged for treason. Risky? Yes. Ballsy? Extremely. Historic? Absolutely. Meanwhile, back at the colonies. Once the Declaration was approved, copies were made and sent across the colonies. They were read aloud in town squares, printed in newspapers, and nailed to tavern doors. People gathered to hear it, cheered, rang bells, lit bonfires, and even held mock funerals for King George. It was the ultimate block his number energy. No more taxation, no more tea drama, no more British boyfriends. For everyday colonists, it was surreal. They were no longer just part of an empire, they were Americans. Sure, they had no formal government, were mid-war, and didn't have TikTok to celebrate, but they had hope. And hot dogs hadn't been invented yet, but emotionally, they were grilling. Fun fact: July 4th celebrations start early. Even during the war, some towns started celebrating July 4th with feasts, parades, and cannon blasts. In Philadelphia, they held public readings, fired guns into the air, safely we hope, and basically threw the first USA birthday party. Over time, July 4th became more than just a date. It became a vibe. Freedom, fireworks, family cookouts, and someone's uncle wearing a tank top with an eagle on it. And honestly, Jefferson would have approved. Maybe not the tank top, but definitely the sentiment. Chapter 4. Winter, War, and Whig Problems. The revolutionary hustle begins. So, the declaration was signed. The breakup was official. Fireworks lit. Freedom declared. But the vibes still tense. See, just because the US said it was independent doesn't mean Britain responded with wishing you the best on your new journey. Nope. Britain responded like any toxic ex, by doubling down. The Revolutionary War was far from over. In fact, it had just begun. Enter General George Big G Washington. General George Washington had now taken command of the new Continental Army, a scrappy squad of volunteers, farmers, blacksmiths, and guys who'd never held a gun before but had main character energy. They had no uniforms, barely any training, limited weapons, and half of them didn't own shoes. Imagine trying to start a revolution in Crocs and vibes alone. That was the Continental Army. Washington, meanwhile, was trying to hold it together, like a single mom in a minivan with 3 kids and no GPS. He was brave, dramatic, and committed. Also, his Whig game was elite. Britain was in full boss battle mode. Britain wasn't about to hand over its favorite colonies just because a few guys in Philly got poetic. They sent more troops, more ships, and mercenaries from Germany called Hessians. Basically, the DLC villains of this war. By 1776, the British had taken New York and were coming in hot. They had uniforms. They had strategy. They had that passive-aggressive, we-invented-you energy. The Americans, they had willpower, wool coats, and pure spite. Join or die was more than a tattoo idea. The colonies knew this wasn't a one-man show. If they didn't stick together, they'd fall apart. Literally. So propaganda kicked in. Benjamin Franklin's famous Join or Die cartoon showed a chopped-up snake representing the colonies. Translation: get it together or we're toast. Franklin was the king of early memes. He also had side hustles in printing, science, inventions, and flirting with French women. But we'll get there. Valley Forge, the realest winter ever. Fast forward to 1777 to 1778. Washington's army set up camp at a place called Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. And y'all, it was giving frostbite, hunger, and full-on depression tick-tock energy. Soldiers were barefoot. Food was scarce. Disease was rampant. And morale? On the floor. But Washington didn't dip. He stayed. He encouraged his men. And most importantly, he brought in a secret weapon. Baron von Steuben, a fabulously dramatic Prussian officer who trained the army with military discipline, flair, and probably a sprinkle of sass. Von Steuben turned ragtag volunteers into legit fighters. He rewrote the military manual, enforced hygiene, finally, and taught soldiers how to actually drill. He was like the Gordon Ramsay of military training. Loud, blunt, and weirdly effective. Meanwhile, in Europe, America was trying to convince France to help out. France was like, "You want us to fight Britain? Say less." They'd had beef with Britain since the 1600s. Thanks to some solid PR from Benjamin Franklin, who wore a raccoon hat and leaned into the charming backwoods philosopher aesthetic, France agreed to join. This was game-changing. With French troops, supplies, and ships, the colonies finally had a fighting chance. And yes, France was definitely petty. But in this case, petty saved the day. Fun fact: Washington's teeth weren't wood. Okay, side note, but we gotta clear something up. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. That's a myth. His dentures were made of human teeth. Ew. Horse teeth. double ew, ivory, and some lead. So, in modern terms, his grill was giving Frankenstein dentist nightmare, but not lumberjack. Still, he pulled off the stoic father of the nation look like a champ. Battles, burnout, and brave moments. Over the next few years, the war dragged on, with major battles like Saratoga, American win, Monmouth, hot, muddy, confusing, Charleston, British W, unfortunately, and dozens of smaller skirmishes, ambushes, and dramatic retreats. Soldiers rotated between battlefields and heartbreak. Families sent letters. Spies were everywhere. And through it all, regular people kept farming, printing newspapers, raising kids, and desperately trying to keep up with wartime gossip. The vibe was freedom, but make it exhausting. Still not over. By 1780, the war was still raging. But hope was growing. Alliances were building, the troops were trained, France was in the mix, and Washington had a twinkle in his wooden, not wooden smile that said, "We might actually pull this off." But it would take one final checkmate. One big, bold, bald move to end it all. Chapter 5. Betrayal, Big Moves, and the Yorktown Mic Drop. By the early 1780s, the colonies were tired. The war had been dragging on longer than your roommate's situationship. There were wins, there were losses, there were powdered wigs flying off in the wind. But morale? Fading. Enter the final boss stage of the revolution. Betrayal, brilliance, and the grand finale at Yorktown. Benedict Arnold, the original snake emoji. Let's start with the T. Benedict Arnold was once a war hero. Brave, respected, and a key player at the Battle of Saratoga. Basically the he carried of the Revolutionary Squad. But then, he flipped. Why? Well, Arnold felt underappreciated. He was passed over for promotions, and he was deep in debt. Add in a loyalist wife and a big old grudge, and you've got yourself a colonial villain arc. He plotted to hand over the American fort at West Point to the British in 1780. Yes, the actual West Point. He got caught, barely, escaped to the British side, and forever had his name dragged harder than a redcoat at Valley Forge. To this day, calling someone a Benedict Arnold is still the historical version of throwing hands. Hey, real quick, you still with me? Or did you conk out somewhere between debt and drama? If you're asleep right now, that's okay. George Washington would be proud. He literally told his troops to rest whenever they could. And if you're awake, well, Benedict Arnold would have betrayed you by now. So, good on you for staying loyal. Okay, back to it. Shh. Softly, though. We're heading to Yorktown. The final move. Yorktown. By 1781, General George Washington was ready for the last big swing. With help from French Commander Rochambeau and the French fleet led by Admiral de Grasse, they cooked up a bold plan. Trap British General Cornwallis and his army at Yorktown, Virginia. Washington moved troops down from New York. The French cut off the sea, and Cornwallis realized he was basically the last player standing in a very awkward game of historical dodgeball. The siege of Yorktown lasted several weeks. Cannon fire, trenches, tense standoffs, and finally Cornwallis waved the white flag. Well, technically he sent a dude to wave the white flag because he didn't want to do it himself. Coward vibes. It's over. Play the sad violin, King George. On October 19, 1781, the British surrendered at Yorktown, and in one of the pettiest and most poetic historical moves of all time, the British troops played a tune called "The World Turned Upside Down" as they marched out. Dramatic? Yes. Necessary? Also yes. Because the world had turned upside down. The colonies actually won. Mic. Drop. Now what? Even though the fighting had stopped, the paperwork took a while. The Treaty of Paris wasn't signed until 1783, officially ending the war and recognizing the United States as a legit country. The US had gone from rebellious tea-tossers to full-blown founders. Everyone was exhausted. Washington cried. Ben Franklin probably cracked a flirty joke, and Thomas Jefferson was already thinking about writing another dramatic letter. Fun fact, Cornwallis pretended to be sick. Yep, during the surrender, Lord Cornwallis claimed he was too sick to attend the ceremony. So he sent his second-in-command to take the L for him. That's right, the man couldn't even show up to the breakup. Ultimate ghosting. The 18th century version of left you on red. Chapter 6. From Scroll to Sparkler. The Birth of the American Holiday. The war was over. The tea had been tossed, the Whigs were slightly less tense. And America? She was officially single, independent, and figuring out what to do next. But just because the United States existed on paper didn't mean it instantly became the land of barbecues, flags, and inflatable bald eagles. The 4th of July, the holiday, didn't just appear with glitter and potato salad. It took time and a lot of fireworks. Post-war vibes. Extremely now what? After the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, Americans were figuring out how to be, well, American. They had no king, no real national government, no constitution yet, and no idea how to build a country without crashing it. But one thing united everyone: that July 4th moment. The Declaration of Independence became more than just a political document. It became a symbol, a rallying cry, a mood. Cities like Philadelphia began holding annual celebrations with public readings of the Declaration, bell-ringing, cannons blasting, safely-ish, parades, and the 18th century version of fireworks, which was basically light this thing and run. It was modest, but the energy was there. Fireworks. Enter the chat. Let's talk about fireworks. Yes, they're loud. Yes, your neighbor always starts them 2 days early. But in the 1700s, they were the height of celebration. Colorful, dramatic, and loud enough to annoy the monarchy spiritually. Fireworks had been used in Europe for royal birthdays and military victories, so using them to celebrate the Declaration was pure poetic rebellion. By the late 1700s and early 1800s, cities began incorporating fireworks into their July 4th festivities as a way to light up the sky with freedom. Boons of liberty, crackles of independence, and occasional singed eyebrows of patriotism. Fast forward to the 1800s. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, two of the big founding fathers and besties turned frenemies, both passed away on July 4th, 1826. Yes, really, 50 years after the signing, on the same day. Coincidence? Fate? Founding father group chat plan? We may never know. Their twin departures only cemented July 4th as the emotional birthday of the nation. It wasn't just about the Declaration anymore. It was about the journey, the sacrifice, the drama. Soon, cities were hosting parades with brass bands, floats pulled by horses, cannon salutes, and community picnics with suspicious potato salad. It was starting to look like the holiday we know, minus the foam Statue of Liberty hats. Officially official. Even though Americans had been celebrating July 4th informally for decades, it wasn't until 1870, almost 100 years later, that Congress declared Independence Day an official federal holiday. That's right. It took nearly a century for the US government to say, yeah, okay, we'll give you the day off. Later, in 1941, it was solidified as a paid federal holiday, the ultimate glow-up. Now, it was truly recognized coast to coast, from small towns waving flags to big cities with orchestras and booming fireworks shows. Hot dogs and the American way. You can't talk about modern Independence Day without talking about hot dogs. Seriously. Americans eat roughly 150 million hot dogs on July 4th. That's enough to stretch from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles 5 times. Why hot dogs? Because nothing says, "I love freedom," like a questionable meat tube on a bun. And let's not forget the annual Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest, where grown adults risk indigestion for glory, mustard belts, and eternal bragging rights. It's peak American culture, a food fight disguised as a tradition. Red, white, and really loud. Today, July 4th is celebrated with fireworks displays from coast to coast, backyard barbecues with that one uncle who insists he knows how to grill, flag-themed everything, from swimsuits to cupcakes, patriotic playlists that include both the Star-Spangled Banner and someone's aggressively off-key karaoke version of it. And while it's easy to joke about the snacks and chaos, there's a deep, real beauty underneath it all. Because July 4th is more than a day off. It's a time when Americans, loud, messy, passionate, pause to remember a moment when they dared to dream something outrageous. A country built not on royalty, but on rebellion and hope. And there you have it, my dear midnight patriot. From secret meetings and salty tea to fireworks and hot dogs, we've strolled through the star-spangled saga of how July 4th became the most American day of the year. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, and it definitely wasn't quiet. But it was bold, messy, defiant, and full of people who dared to say, "We deserve better." That same spark, the one that lit up the skies of 1776, still lives in you. Yes, you, wrapped up like a sleepy burrito right now. If you enjoyed this starry stroll through history, gently tap subscribe, give this video a quiet little thumbs up, and turn on notifications so we can keep hanging out, same time, same dreams. And hey, drop a comment and let me know, where are you listening from tonight? Now, before I let you slip into your well-earned nap of liberty, here's a little joke to end things on a bang. What did the ghost say on the 4th of July? Red, white, and boo! Good night, my little liberty bean. Sleep free, dream big, and may your inner founding father tuck you in with peace and patriotism.